What if the cartoons you loved as a child appeared on television for the first time today? Some would survive, but others would cause angry headlines before the opening theme finished. From questionable stereotypes to reckless behavior presented as comedy, these characters reveal how dramatically television standards have changed. Before the countdown begins, please like this video and share it. Subscribe to our channel for more forgotten stories from television's wildest decades. Number 16. Scrappy-Doo, 1979. When Scooby-Doo's popularity began slipping, Hanna-Barbera introduced a tiny puppy with enough confidence for an entire superhero team. Scrappy-Doo arrived in 1979 as Scooby's energetic nephew, shouting about puppy power, while charging directly toward monsters that terrified his much larger uncle. The series continued the familiar mystery formula. Teen detectives investigated frightening locations, uncovered clues, and eventually exposed supposedly supernatural creatures as criminals wearing disguises. Scrappy changed the rhythm because he rarely wanted to search quietly. He wanted an immediate confrontation. The memorable scene repeated in countless variations. Scrappy spotted a towering monster, raised his fists and attempted to fight it. Scooby and Shaggy desperately grabbed him before he could reach the danger. Their retreat created the chase sequence that usually carried the episode toward its final reveal. Modern television would not necessarily ban Scrappy, but writers would probably soften his behavior. A child-coded character repeatedly trying to begin physical confrontations could be viewed as presenting aggression as bravery. His confidence also frequently placed other characters in danger, yet he rarely faced lasting consequences. A modern version would likely teach Scrappy the difference between courage and recklessness. He could still be fearless, but his victories would come through observation, teamwork, or helping frightened people, rather than immediately offering to fight everyone. The original character was created during a desperate effort to revive declining ratings, and he succeeded in keeping the franchise alive. However, his loud, confrontational personality would almost certainly be rewritten for a younger audience today. Number 15. Yook, 1979. Behind a miniature doghouse lived one of the strangest secret weapons in cartoon history. Yook appeared beside Mighty Man, a wealthy crime fighter who could shrink himself to a few inches while gaining flight and extraordinary strength. Their adventures followed a traditional superhero pattern. Villains threatened the city with giant magnets, stolen inventions, time-freezing devices, and elaborate robbery plans. Mighty Man attempted to stop them, while Yook provided chaotic assistance. The scene audiences remembered always involved the doghouse, covering Yook's head. Whenever the heroes became trapped, Yook lifted the little structure and revealed his face. Viewers never saw it directly. Instead, criminals screamed, machinery collapsed, and nearby objects were damaged, simply because Yook was supposedly the ugliest dog alive. That joke would face immediate criticism today. Yook's entire identity was built around the idea that an unattractive face was horrifying, dangerous, and something that needed to remain hidden. Children with facial differences, scars, or visible medical conditions could easily understand the message in a painful way. Looking different makes people frightening. The character also had very little control over how others described him. Even his friends introduced him through his appearance rather than his loyalty, intelligence, or courage. A modern adaptation could preserve the mysterious doghouse while changing its meaning. Perhaps Yook hides an uncontrollable superpower, bright energy, or hypnotic vision, rather than an ugly face. He would not need to disappear completely. The central joke, however, would almost certainly be removed. Modern children's television is more careful about turning someone's body or facial appearance into the reason other characters panic, faint, or run away. If these forgotten characters are bringing back memories, subscribe now and join our growing community of classic cartoon fans. Your support helps us uncover more television history that modern networks rarely discuss. Number 14. Popeye, 1978. By the late 70s, one of animation's oldest tough guys was still throwing himself into impossible situations. Hanna-Barbera brought Popeye back to Saturday mornings in the all-new Popeye Hour, which debuted on CBS in September 1978, and reunited him with Olive Oyl, Bluto, Wimpy, and other familiar characters. The basic formula remained instantly recognizable. Trouble appeared, Bluto created chaos, Olive became involved, and Popeye eventually found enough strength or determination to turn the situation around. His sailor image, unusual speech, and famous spinach-powered toughness remained central to the character. Interestingly, producers were already dealing with changing television standards. The 1978 series deliberately reduced the level of physical conflict because Saturday morning networks had become more cautious about animated violence. That makes Popeye especially interesting today. His classic identity is associated with a pipe, constant confrontations, and the idea that a physical showdown can provide the final answer to almost any disagreement. Modern preschool or young children's television would probably soften those elements even further. Olive's traditional position between Popeye and Bluto would also be reconsidered. Instead of repeatedly becoming the reason two men compete, she would receive more control over the adventure itself. Popeye would certainly not vanish. He is far too recognizable for that. But a completely faithful recreation of his older behavior would be difficult to market as ordinary children's television. A modern version would likely emphasize his loyalty, resilience, and spinach-powered comedy, while turning the fighting into exaggerated fantasy action and quietly retiring the smoking imagery. Number 13. Genie, 1973. A magical bottle discovered on a California beach introduced viewers to a teenage version of one of television's most famous genies. In Hanna-Barbera's animated Genie, high school student Corey Anders rescued the title character, and she began accompanying him through school problems, sporting competitions, and supernatural adventures. The cartoon differed from the earlier live-action sitcom, but it retained an uncomfortable central idea. Genie possessed extraordinary magical power, yet much of her life revolved around the ordinary young man who discovered her bottle. Memorable episodes showed Genie using spells to help Corey win a contest, escape embarrassment, or overcome a rival. Her magic frequently created a larger disaster, forcing everyone to repair the situation before the final scene. Genie was capable of changing reality, but jealousy and devotion to Corey often controlled her decisions. A modern production would question why such a powerful female character lacked independent goals. Where was her family? What did she want to study? Did she choose to remain with Corey, or was she magically obligated to follow the person who opened her bottle? The romantic jealousy would also require adjustment. Female characters in older cartoons were often expected to compete over male attention. Genie occasionally treated another girl as a threat, even when Corey had done nothing meaningful to earn that level of devotion. A reboot could easily save the concept. Genie might be a magical exchange student, learning about human life, while protecting the world from supernatural dangers. Corey could become her equal friend, rather than the center of her identity. Number 12. Captain Caveman, 1977. Frozen inside a block of prehistoric ice, Captain Caveman was discovered and released by three teenage mystery solvers known as the Teen Angels. He became their super-powered companion, combining detective comedy with a parody of Charlie's Angels and the familiar structure of Scooby-Doo. The group traveled to locations where jewels vanished, monsters appeared, or valuable inventions were stolen. Dee Dee usually examined the evidence, Taffy developed plans, and Brenda frequently became frightened or required rescuing. Captain Caveman charged into action with his famous battle cry. The unforgettable scenes involved objects emerging from his enormous hair. His body seemed to contain ladders, tools, gadgets, and almost anything required by the story. He could also fly using his club, although the power often failed at the worst possible moment. Modern objections would focus on the way primitive behavior was defined. Captain Caveman spoke in broken sentences, mumbled nonsense phrases, ate inedible objects, and solved problems through strength. The humor treated limited language and uncontrolled appetite as natural signs of being prehistoric. The Teen Angels would also require revision. Brenda's repeated role as the frightened victim reflects an old formula in which one woman was intelligent, another was fashionable, and another existed to panic. A modern Captain Caveman could remain wonderfully strange. His speech could be unusual because he speaks an ancient language, not because he lacks intelligence. He might understand lost technology, forgotten ecosystems, or historical mysteries that modern people cannot solve. His giant club would probably become a magical tool, rather than a casual symbol of hitting problems until they disappear. The original character remains visually unforgettable, but his caveman dialogue, gender roles, and physical comedy would receive serious rewriting before returning to children's television. Number 11. Fangface, 1978. One glance at the moon could turn an ordinary teenager into complete cartoon chaos. That was the strange problem facing Sherman Fangsworth in Fangface, the Ruby Spears mystery series that arrived on ABC in 1978. Whenever Sherman saw the full moon, or sometimes even an image resembling it, he transformed into the wildly unpredictable werewolf known as Fangface. His friends traveled from mystery to mystery, confronting criminals and bizarre supernatural threats. Sherman normally appeared harmless and confused, but once the transformation happened, Fangface rushed through the adventure like an uncontrollable storm. That transformation created the show's signature joke. A moon appeared, Sherman changed instantly, and his friends suddenly had two problems: defeating the villain and controlling their own teammate. Modern writers might find several elements uncomfortable. Even before transforming, Sherman's nickname Fangs emphasized his unusual teeth and appearance. Afterward, uncontrolled aggression became entertainment, rather than something carrying serious consequences. The character also had remarkably little control over his condition. His friends sometimes had to manage what he saw, because almost anything resembling a moon could trigger another transformation. A reboot could turn that idea into something stronger. Sherman might understand his transformation, learn techniques for controlling it, and deliberately use Fangface when the group genuinely needs extra strength. The monster could remain funny without presenting loss of control as the entire personality. Nobody would need to erase Fangface, but the appearance-based nickname, constant transformation jokes, and reckless behavior would probably be redesigned before a network aimed the original formula at young children today. Number 10. Fat Albert, 1972. Few 70s cartoons attempted to educate children as directly as Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. Each episode followed a group of friends confronting a recognizable problem, including dishonesty, peer pressure, prejudice, vandalism, health, fear, or responsibility. Fat Albert was usually the group's moral center. He listened when others argued, recognized when someone was making a dangerous choice, and tried to guide his friends toward a solution. At the end, the children often performed a song on homemade instruments in their junkyard clubhouse, repeating the lesson of the story. That positive history makes this entry more complicated. The character was not created merely to mock a larger child. He was kind, responsible, and frequently more emotionally intelligent than everyone around him. The series also gave black children sustained visibility, at a time when American animation offered very little. However, a modern network would almost certainly question the name. Defining a child through body size would be considered unnecessarily cruel, especially when the description follows him through every adventure. Several friends were also identified through exaggerated physical traits, unusual speech, or insulting nicknames. The famous opening call immediately placed attention on Albert's size before audiences learned anything about his character. Younger viewers could repeat the nickname toward classmates, even though the program itself usually promoted kindness. A modern adaptation might simply call him Albert and allow his body type to exist without becoming his title. The educational stories could remain, while nutrition, exercise, and self-esteem would be discussed without embarrassment or ridicule. The program was historically significant and often compassionate. That does not mean every creative decision has aged equally well. Today, Albert would probably be celebrated as a thoughtful leader, but the branding built around his weight would be abandoned. The character needs reframing, not erasure. Number 9. Tarzan, 1976. Swinging above the jungle with extraordinary strength, Tarzan entered Saturday morning television through Filmation's Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle. The animated series began in 1976 and drew heavily from Edgar Rice Burroughs' original adventure stories. Episodes sent Tarzan into hidden cities, forgotten kingdoms, and unexplored territories. He rescued travelers, protected animals, and battled rulers who threatened their own people. Unlike some earlier screen versions, the cartoon often avoided using ordinary African communities as anonymous enemies. Lost civilizations and fantasy societies supplied many of its villains instead. The scenes viewers remember feature Tarzan racing through the trees, calling animals for assistance, or entering a mysterious city that appears to have survived untouched for centuries. He was presented as noble, fearless, and almost perfectly adapted to the natural world. Even with Filmation's attempts to improve the material, the larger concept would face difficult questions today. Tarzan remains a European man who becomes the supreme protector and authority of an African environment. Local people frequently need his understanding, strength, or leadership, continuing a colonial fantasy in which an outsider becomes more capable than those born there. The fictional geography creates another problem. Africa becomes an endless land of jungles, magical tribes, ancient temples, and hidden kingdoms. Individual nations, languages, and modern cities largely disappear. A modern version would require African writers, historians, and artists. Tarzan could still be a survivor raised in isolation, but he would not automatically become the unquestioned ruler of an entire region. Local heroes would possess equal knowledge and agency. Filmation's adaptation was considered more faithful to the novels and consciously avoided some older jungle clichés. Nevertheless, the central White Lord of Africa image is so deeply connected to colonial storytelling that a direct revival would be extremely difficult. Modern producers would either transform the premise or leave this version in the archive with historical context. Number 8. Hong Kong Phooey, 1974. Inside an ordinary police station worked Penry Pooch, a mild-mannered janitor with a secret identity. Whenever a crime was reported, Penry disappeared behind a vending machine, jumped into a filing cabinet, and emerged as Hong Kong Phooey, a masked martial arts hero. Unfortunately, he was rarely responsible for his own victories. Penry studied from a correspondence course martial arts book and charged into cases with enormous confidence. His intelligent cat, Spot, quietly solved the mystery, stopped the criminal, or created the lucky accident that made Phooey appear heroic. The filing cabinet transformation remains the show's most famous scene. Penry jumped into the bottom drawer, became stuck, and needed Spot's assistance before emerging from the top. He then launched himself through an elaborate route into the Phooey-mobile. The character was voiced with tremendous warmth by Scatman Crothers, and the program did not present Penry as an ethnic caricature. He was an anthropomorphic dog, and many viewers continue to defend the series as harmless martial arts comedy. The concern comes from branding. The name Hong Kong Phooey, the costume, the magical foreign instruction book, and the broad collection of kung fu imagery use an Asian location as an exotic comedy label. No meaningful Hong Kong culture appears. The setting exists mainly because American audiences associated East Asia with martial arts. A modern studio might preserve Penry, but give him an entirely fictional superhero name. Alternatively, the series could genuinely connect him to Hong Kong by hiring local creators and treating the city as a real place rather than a catchy phrase. Spot would also deserve recognition. The supposedly foolish male hero receives public praise, while the competent helper remains invisible. A modern version could turn that imbalance into intentional satire, with Spot finally receiving credit. Number 7. Hair Bear, 1971. Few cartoon characters could look more unmistakably 70s than the leader of the Hair Bear bunch. Hair Bear lived inside Wonderland Zoo with Booby Bear and Square Bear, but instead of quietly accepting life behind the fences, the trio constantly developed schemes to outsmart zookeeper Mr. Peevely and his assistant. The series premiered in 1971. Their adventures often involved escaping, manipulating the staff, or turning Peevely's own plans against him. One episode had Hair Bear rig a raffle and end up winning control of the zoo, while another centered on an elaborate attempt to convince Peevely that an imaginary giant rabbit existed. Visually, the character was pure early 70s fashion. Hair Bear wore an enormous Afro-style hairstyle, while the trio was deliberately given the language and attitude of the era's fashionable, hip youth culture. Contemporary descriptions of the program still note both the Afro and the Bear's hippie influence. That cultural coding would receive much more attention today. A modern studio would ask whether the design was simply celebrating 70s fashion or borrowing recognizable elements from real communities as a shortcut for making a character seem cool. His endless scams would also probably be adjusted. Hair Bear frequently succeeds because he can deceive authority figures more effectively than they can catch him. A reboot would have an easy solution. Keep his intelligence, confidence, and fabulous hairstyle, but give him clearer motivations and a personality beyond 70s slang and trickery. Hair Bear could still be the smartest animal in the zoo. Modern writers would simply make sure the audience laughs at his plans, rather than at the cultural image used to package him. Number 6. Samurai, 1977. When the all-new Super Friends Hour expanded its team in 1977, producers introduced several heroes, intended to make the group appear more diverse. One of them was a Japanese hero, known only as Samurai. He fought beside Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and other famous DC characters. Samurai could transform his body into wind, create fiery energy, and use unusual powers inspired by Japanese words and imagery. When a disaster threatened the world, he appeared as the team's designated Japanese representative. The memorable moments involved Samurai announcing an ability before changing form or creating a powerful elemental attack. Unfortunately, Viewers learned almost nothing about the person behind the costume. His civilian identity, occupation, family, and personal motivations received little attention. That creates the modern problem. Samurai is not an individual name. It is the title of a historical warrior class. Imagine introducing an American superhero called Cowboy and expecting that single idea to represent the entire country. The costume, name, and powers reduce Japanese identity to familiar symbols selected for Western viewers. His limited dialogue made matters worse. The white heroes possessed famous cities, personal tragedies, supporting characters, and complicated histories. Samurai mostly appeared when the story needed international representation or a specific power. Modern DC stories have occasionally attempted to place the character within a broader Japanese superhero tradition. A serious adaptation would need to give him a real name, hometown, profession, and reason for becoming a hero. His abilities could connect to mythology or technology through researched storytelling rather than random foreign-sounding phrases. Number 5. Black Vulcan, 1977. Electricity flashed across the screen when Black Vulcan joined the Super Friends. He was one of the non-white heroes added to broaden a team previously dominated by familiar white characters. His powers allowed him to generate electrical energy, fly, and create spectacular lightning-based attacks. Whenever machines failed, aliens invaded, or a villain threatened a city, Black Vulcan could transform his body into living electricity and race toward the emergency. On the surface, nothing about that sounds offensive. He was powerful, brave, and treated as a trusted teammate. For many children, simply seeing a black superhero fighting beside Batman and Superman was meaningful. The difficulty begins with his name. Superman is not called White Kryptonian. Batman is not White Bat. Yet Black Vulcan's racial identity was placed directly in his superhero title. The label suggests that being black was the unusual characteristic separating him from the supposedly neutral heroes. He also lacked the civilian life that made other characters memorable. Viewers did not regularly see his home, career, family, fears, or personal relationships. He appeared when needed, delivered electrical power, and then moved aside. The historical context makes the decision even stranger. DC introduced Black Lightning in comics during the same year, and that character possessed a name, Jefferson Pierce, along with a profession, community, and supporting cast. Black Vulcan was created separately for television, rather than adapting that established hero. The famous scenes generally involve him crossing his arms, releasing lightning, and announcing his attack. Visually, he was impressive. Narratively, he remained thin. Number 4. Arnie Barkley, 1972. Saturday morning television rarely became as argumentative as the Barkleys. This 1972 animated sitcom followed an anthropomorphic dog family led by Arnie Barkley, a short-tempered bus driver struggling to understand children whose ideas seemed completely different from his own. The series drew heavily from the changing family sitcom formula associated with programs such as All in the Family. Instead of monsters or superheroes, Arnie battled generational change. His children questioned his opinions, new social attitudes confused him, and his determination to prove himself usually created the week's disaster. One early story shows exactly why the character would become controversial today. Arnie dislikes long-haired young men and becomes horrified when his daughter wants to date one. His paranoia eventually sends him crashing into a rock concert, destroying instruments and causing enough chaos to get himself arrested. Another episode begins when his daughter discusses women's rights. Arnie insists that men can perform everything better than women, leading him and his wife Agnes to switch responsibilities and discover how foolish his assumptions are. To be fair, the program frequently made Arnie the target of the joke. His outdated opinions created problems precisely because the story wanted him to learn something. But modern children's television would probably make that criticism much clearer. Short clips of Arnie insulting younger people or dismissing women could easily lose the lesson surrounding them. A new version could preserve the generational conflict while giving Agnes and the children stronger voices from the beginning. Arnie would not need to be banned because he holds flawed opinions. The challenge would be making absolutely certain audiences understand that the cartoon is criticizing those opinions, rather than presenting them as ordinary family wisdom. Number 3. Ming the Merciless, 1979. Across the planet, Mongo ruled one of science fiction's most recognizable tyrants. Ming the Merciless appeared in Filmation's The New Adventures of Flash Gordon, ordering armies, manipulating kingdoms, and preparing to extend his control beyond his own world. The series followed Flash Gordon, Dale Arden, and scientist Hans Zarkov after they reached Mongo. They encountered strange civilizations, rebellious rulers, and dangerous machines, while trying to prevent Ming from threatening Earth. Memorable scenes placed Ming inside his enormous palace, calmly announcing a cruel plan, while soldiers and mechanical guards waited for instructions. His daughter, Princess Aura, often complicated matters through her attraction to Flash and her uncertain loyalty to her father. Ming was not invented during the 70s. He originated decades earlier, but the 1979 cartoon carried his classic design into a new generation. That design came from the Yellow Peril tradition, in which Western stories imagined Asian-coded rulers as mysterious, deceptive threats seeking global domination. His sharp facial hair, robes, name, and imperial surroundings borrowed heavily from generalized East Asian imagery. Mongo was fictional, yet the visual language told audiences which real-world cultures were being used to signal danger and foreignness. Modern science fiction still features dictators. The problem is not Ming's cruelty. The problem is using racialized Asian characteristics as visual evidence that he is cruel. A villain should be frightening because of his decisions, ideology, and actions, not because he resembles an old Western caricature. Later adaptations have struggled with this history. One solution is to redesign Ming completely, presenting him as an alien authoritarian without recognizable ethnic coding. Another is to make Mongo genuinely multicultural and detach his empire from any single Earth culture. Number 2. Fritz the Cat, 1972. Anyone who believed all animation was made for children received a shocking correction in 1972. Ralph Bakshi's Fritz the Cat, adapted from Robert Crumb's underground comic character, became the first American animated feature to receive an X rating. Fritz was not a lovable family pet. He was a selfish college student, dishonest activist, and reckless pleasure seeker, wandering through a distorted version of New York. He abandoned responsibilities, manipulated people, and became involved in increasingly dangerous political situations. The film used anthropomorphic animals to satirize college culture, racial conflict, empty revolutionary language, and the hypocrisy of people who claimed to be changing society while mainly serving themselves. Fritz was intentionally unpleasant. The audience was not supposed to treat every decision as admirable. One famous sequence begins with Fritz performing for an audience of young women, pretending to be profound while repeating fashionable ideas he barely understands. The scene exposes how he uses politics and artistic language to impress people. From there, the story grows darker as his careless behavior affects entire communities. Why would he face restrictions today, when modern adult animation can be extremely provocative? Context is the answer. Fritz appears in material containing adult situations, substance use, harsh language, violence, and racial caricatures. The film's satire deliberately employs offensive imagery, but satire does not guarantee that every audience will understand the intended criticism. The portrayal of black characters as crows has drawn particular criticism. Even when the film attempts to expose racism, it uses visual traditions connected to degrading entertainment. Modern creators would be challenged to explain why those images were necessary and whose perspective controlled the satire. Number 1. Brother Rabbit, 1975. At the top of the countdown stands a character from one of the most debated animated films of the 70s. Brother Rabbit appeared in Ralph Bakshi's controversial 1975 mixture of live action and animation, adapted loosely from the Brer Rabbit tradition. The story follows Brother Rabbit, Preacher Fox, and Brother Bear as they leave the rural South and enter Harlem. Instead of discovering opportunity, they encounter corrupt police officers, organized crime, dishonest religious figures, and systems built to exploit vulnerable communities. Brother Rabbit decides that survival requires more than innocence. He becomes a trickster, challenges powerful criminals, and attempts to take control of the neighborhood. His cleverness connects him to older folk tales, in which a physically weaker character survives by outthinking stronger enemies. Several sequences deliberately resemble racist American cartoons before twisting those images into violent social satire. Bakshi said he wanted to confront stereotypes directly, rather than pretend they had never existed. The film attacked organized crime, racist institutions, and Hollywood's history of reducing black characters to insulting caricatures. That disagreement explains why Brother Rabbit ranks first. The film was created partly as an attack on racism, yet it used some of the most painful visual language in American entertainment to deliver that attack. Intention and impact collided. The original title itself contained an outdated racial term. No mainstream studio would place that word on a new animated feature today. Marketing departments, streaming services, and theater chains would reject it before audiences saw a single frame. The most famous moments are difficult to separate from the controversy. Live-action characters tell stories that transform into grotesque animated visions. Brother Rabbit moves through Harlem as the city becomes a nightmare of greed, prejudice, and exploitation. The audience is never allowed to relax inside a comfortable heroic fantasy. Today, the film would probably appear only through a specialist distributor, with a strict adult rating, detailed content warnings, and essays explaining its historical background. Social media clips would create outrage because short scenes cannot communicate the full satirical argument. Were these characters truly harmless products of their time, or should creators have known better even then? Their cartoons remain valuable pieces of television history, but nostalgia should never prevent honest discussion. Some deserve thoughtful updates, while others belong in archives with proper context. Tell us which characters surprised you most, and which 70s cartoons should appear in our next countdown. Like, share, and subscribe for more forgotten stories from classic entertainment.